Well, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this edition of PharmChats. Get the chance to talk with one of our stellar alums, as I like to say, Dr. Trey Warnock. I've known Trey since he was early on in our program and associated with the School of Pharmacy. So really looking forward to this conversation. Trey, thanks so much for being with us today.
Not a problem at all, not a problem.
Well, we're going to start out with a little bit of background information. Trey, if you would, tell us where you're from originally.
So I actually have been many places, but I grew up in my adolescent years in Tampa, Florida. But I joke that I'm actually not from really anywhere because I lived about 8.5 years in Georgia, 8.5 years in Florida, 8.5 years in Mississippi, and then 2 years in Kentucky, and now I'm back here. So I guess I'm from here.
Gotcha, very good. Well, my next question is probably obvious to you. It's why Ole Miss? And I smile when I think that because one of the first things I heard about you was that you introduced yourself as Trey from Ole Miss. So tell me why Ole Miss?
Well, it started off in high school that, like any high school kid, I was trying to find out where I wanted to go and who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And I had a bunch of friends I hung out with for free period, and I knew I wanted to get out of the state of Florida. And they're applying to Ole Miss. I was like, well, I'm sure I'll apply. It's in the SEC, and it seems like a great school to go to. And I applied, and the rest is history from there. And I actually fell into pharmacy from there.
Very good. Well, like I said, I heard that Trey from Ole Miss, so it's great to be able to hear that and to know that you were trying to be with some other friends. So tell me about your original interest in pharmacy. I know a bit about this, but I'd like to hear from you here.
Yeah, of course. Well, it started off with I've always loved chemistry and biology. I mean, since I can remember, and when you're trying to figure out what you want to do with that love for something to turn it into a trade or a job, my parents encouraged me to take a look at pharmacy because it has heavily to do with chemistry. And I actually wanted to, my passion is helping and serving others. And I really wanted that to be my foundation for whatever I did. But I also wanted to use the gifts that I've been given, which I believe to be the basic sciences. And combining those two together led me down the path of pharmacy.
Very good. That's exciting. What are some of your favorite memories from pharmacy school, Trey? Oh,
wow. That, it's actually really interesting because I was just talking about this with somebody, and I don't want to get too philosophical about it, but I feel like as I get older, the years get shorter, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But pharmacy school felt like it was 12 years. But one of the fondest memories I have were when we were getting ready for the flu blitz drive for college game day in the fall of 2014. Me and some friends had an idea that, hey, let's try and get on the game day stage to vaccinate those folks. And we planned out everything and did the social media blitz, and we ended up getting some students up there to vaccinate them. And we ended up getting some billboards to hang, show in the pit during college game day. And we actually, we stayed up all night getting those ready for the next day. And I remember it being like 3:30 when we got to the pit in the Grove. And we hadn't slept at all because that past week we had tests too. So we were coming off of a study block going into college game day. And it was just so cool because the people that were there that were tired with you knew what you had just done. And so you could kind of, commemorate on that. And no, we all joke about that day to this day. But that was one of my fondest memories of pharmacy school.
Well, I remember that day vividly myself because of all the things that were going on. And, in my mind, the flu blitz was one of the highlights of that day. There's a couple other important things that went on that day as well, but yeah. I'm going to hold the flu blitz out as my favorite memory as well. So Trey, when you graduated from Ole Miss, had your PharmD, you took a little different path to a place that I might consider special. Tell me a little bit about that transition as well.
Well, folks may not know, but Dean Allen and I share two alumni places, Ole Miss and the University of Kentucky. Uh, my last year of pharmacy school, I found myself, because that last year is where you really get to kind of deep dive into rotations and see, okay, where can I see my fit, and that gives you a very kind of broad idea of how you should apply your postgraduate training route. And I found myself always getting stuck in the weeds on certain problems that would happen in the hospital or in the community. And I want to solve those problems from a very microscopic standpoint. And, as most folks know, you kind of have to triage those things and keep going forward when you're in practice. And I actually found myself wanting to do a PhD program with the University of Kentucky College of Pharmacy with their clinical and experimental therapeutics program, which is basically a clinical translational pharmacology type of program where it's going to be that bench to bedside pharmacology work. And I went to interview with them at mid-year for PBS, and then I got a email back to come on site for an interview that January. And I kind of made my trek into the basic science world away from the traditional clinical route to be that different kind of influence in pharmacy.
Very good. And I know while you were there, you made some decisions about your career path that would maybe change it a bit. So tell me a little bit about that transition in your mind, and then how you ended up sort of heading back toward Mississippi with your lovely wife.
So, I guess, Dino, you can probably empathize with this well, but if you aren't really truly in grad school, if you don't want to quit grad school at some point, there's those times you're like, oh man, is this for me? Is this for me? But I got to that point where I was also not just in my grad school duties, but I was also a clinical pharmacist over in the hospital in the oncology, inpatient and outpatient infusion pharmacy. And one day I just had that itch in the back of my head that I needed to be doing something else in my life, and going down the PhD route in the manner I was going wasn't necessarily what I was feeling myself called to do. I talked to Lakin about it, and she put me through the ringer to really make sure, because once I hit that switch, there's no going back. I walk into my PI's office and told her how I felt and, what I felt like I needed to go do. And she said, well, don't worry, because you're not the first person to say that in that chair, and you're not the last person. So that was kind of comforting in that. I didn't feel like I'd let anybody down. You have to do what you're called to do. And, I felt this, that's called to service to come back to the state of Mississippi to really kind of bring what I've learned from Kentucky and help change practice on the realm of research at the interface of clinical practice.
Well, it doesn't surprise me at all that you've got a strong background and interest in the basic science, but to want to return to the roots of taking care of people and taking care of patients, it makes a lot of sense to me knowing you as well as I do and understanding your heart for patients. So that means a lot. Tell me about your responsibilities in your current role, Trey.
Yeah, so I guess my official title is an investigational pharmacist specialist, and I would say it's a hybrid position because I don't just do traditional pharmacy activities. There involves a lot of administrative items as well as regulatory items. On a day-to-day basis, from the operational standpoint, we are responsible for the compounding, documentation and dispensation of blinded and unblinded clinical trial investigational products for the University of Mississippi Medical Center. And that can range anywhere from the Cancer Institute all the way to pediatrics. And it could be outpatient, inpatient, or somewhere in between. And that's from the operational day-to-day standpoint. From the 30,000 foot standpoint, we get these protocols from sponsors coming in to the hospital that my boss and I get to our desks. And we have to go over those and kind of comb through the pharmacy manual and see does that make sense and does it fit with our institutional practices. And also sometimes with the protocols itself, are the questions they're asking in the manner that they're quote unquote measuring it, making sense as well. And I take that from my basic science background that I'm able to kind of interject myself into there to that point. There is another regulatory aspect as well to it, where we have to communicate with these companies called clinical research organizations, which is a third-party organization that work with pharmaceutical companies to kind of a plug-and-play company for clinical trials for phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 and post-market stuff. And so they're able to kind of be an unbiased logistics arm to push studies through. So we communicate with those folks, and specifically with a person called a monitor, whose background as a clinical research associate. And we have to talk with them about certain drug accountabilities, where they come on site and check our products and make sure they're destroyed properly, make sure that we've blinded everything appropriately, and kind of check everything because it helps maintain the integrity of the data. So that when the data comes out from these large, massive, multi-center trial studies, that we can say, based off of the regulations that we've put in play to control the things we can control, that the answer that we are viewing is truer than not. So that's a very valid piece of information that, that we can fit into that cog in the wheel, and it's very exciting.
Well, so it really seems like the time you had at Kentucky has set you up well on top of the great experience you had at Ole Miss and doing your PharmD. It brings it all together into this position. So that's exciting, Trey, that you've been able to bring all that together with your passion for patient care, wanting to do that investigation and bring the basic science. So congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
A very, very different role for a pharmacist that you're doing right now. One of the things that's been always exciting to me about our profession are the so many different pathways that our graduates can go down. And so, what advice would you give someone who is, in pharmacy school, maybe coming close to the end of their time? They don't quite know where they want to go to from a practice standpoint. It could even be somebody early in pharmacy school or even thinking about the profession. What should somebody be thinking about as it relates to the profession of pharmacy and all the different pathways that are possible there in the profession, Trey?
So, that's a tough question because, some folks may say, that the chatter on the post-pharmacy world sphere is that the field is becoming extremely saturated, and if you look at it through a very myopic lens, then yeah, that's true. It is becoming saturated. But if you kind of broaden that lens to understand that PharmD is a skill set, much like an engineering degree, an MD, etc., that is a set of skills that you are now credentialed as with the doctorate. And if you take it from that point, then that lens is very broad and the sky is literally the limit. So, that's it's a very hard thing to talk about in school because everybody, at the end of the day, wants that job, and, and that's important. But, starting with your why and why you even started the school in the first place is a great first step, and really understanding the fact that when you are hooded as a doctor, you aren't going to become a different person. The hood doesn't cause the world of knowledge to all of a sudden assimilate into your brain and everything. There's still a very useful thing that you can learn at that moment in time, and it is to understand the concept of meta ignorance, which is you don't know what you don't know, And knowing that, you can now start to make that progressive step forward in humility and understanding that you are not any different than where you started. If you are that person, go back in time to when you got that letter in the mail or that phone call from a pharmacy school ambassador saying, congratulations, you're going to pharmacy school. I mean, that feeling you have in that moment in time is a microscopic view of what your entire career is going to feel and look like from that person from that day forward. A lot of people lose that feeling and that person and that identity when they get inundated with the daily tasks of life and practice, because it's easier just to check in and check out. And while it's okay and it's very healthy to have a separation of work and home, it is also important to be engaged actively in the top as part of your license, whether that's in active practice at the FDA, the Board of Pharmacy, nuclear pharmacy. I mean, there are companies now, those clinical research organizations that are recruiting PharmDs straight out of college to be monitors for companies and to be a consultant. And so there's a whole other area of pharmacy if people just peel back that old school kind of thinking that, oh, I've got to be involved in compounding and drugs and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not true at all. So you just can have a passion for service and science and want to be at the forefront of working with these people that need your help. And that would be a great place to start.
Trey, I love the way you describe that, the lens and how you've got to broaden the lens as you think about that. I'm going to use that at some point, if you don't mind. So
that's fun.
Well, obviously, we're having this conversation a little different than we might have before the pandemic started. So clearly, COVID-19 has had an impact on our lives in so many ways. Tell me about how it's impacted you and your life. I know it's probably affected Lakin's life as well. How has COVID-19 affected you all? Practice, personal, otherwise?
So, I guess I'll start from the personal aspect first. When you're sitting that close to the flame, it's hard to kind of see the perspective of the actual disease and how it's affecting the community globally, because you see the worst of the worst of the worst. And not that there should be any lightness taken to COVID by any shape of the means, but I will say it was hard to relate with other people that were not at the hospital or even in practice from a standpoint of, wow, this is pretty serious. I remember in the very early stages, choosing to social distance right off the bat, not going to the gym anymore. Before it was even a thing to social distance, I was like, I work at the hospital. I don't know if we have any patients. I don't know if we even have testing to test patients yet, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And we started doing that. And the moment we started that, it kind of changed that social interaction that you get from a daily basis, where you can disconnect from folks that you normally work with and talk about other things that aren't healthcare related. And so the topic at hand just became healthcare. So, that was a tough thing to adjust to. And I guess we've done that now because we've found other things, other groups, Zoom. We had Zoom calls with friends. We did like trivia nights, just to kind of change it up some. But from a hospital standpoint, from work, it really changed, because I would say it put our process as a whole for onboarding studies on overdrive, because we had to start COVID studies now. We had to get on the board now, because we are the only, as we like to say here, the only University of Mississippi Medical Center in the state. And it's kind of a beacon where we need to be the leader in that flagship for data and for fighting the cure. Now, as we progress further, we got better at onboarding these studies, and we're actually in the process of onboarding a COVID vaccine study right now, and getting that started here. And so that's going to be an interesting project to be a part of because, that's what everybody's talking about right now. And so it's kind of surreal almost, kind of one of those pinch me moments where you're like, wow, I get to do this every day, which is so cool. But from a standpoint of COVID, that's kind of how that's affected us thus far.
Very good. Well, it's very exciting for you to be a part of that. I know it's great that the University of Mississippi and the University of Mississippi Medical Center are both a part of important trials as it relates to COVID-19. And for you to be in the midst of all of that is exciting. So where do you see pharmacy going in the next 2 to 5 to 10 years, maybe even throughout your career, Trey?
Wow, I think that we're at, if we weren't at it before 20 years ago, we're surely at it now, where we're on the verge of a paradigm shift of how the pharmacist is viewed in the healthcare setting, community and hospital and anywhere alike. We are truly the therapeutic experts. I know speaking to Lakin, that is more involved in direct patient care. She basically on most things helps select the dose and the drug that's supposed to be given for a particular condition on most instances. And that's the reality of patient care now, where we are doing a therapeutic differential of disease, while the physician is doing a diagnostic differential of disease. So we can have a game plan for A, B, and C and routes to flow off of that so that we can keep care efficient and safe. Now, from the community setting, I know that, I've worked there as well. And I will say it is quite hard sometimes to take a moment to do that therapeutic differential during a drug utilization review, because you have umpteen billion tasks, waiting for you to complete that are part of daily flow in a pharmacy. And I think that paradigm shift is that there needs to be more time carved out for that specific thing. And I feel like payers and physicians alike will be seeking out that service actively for us to do that, because it saves them time and money and helps the patient get the best care possible. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. And so I think that having that at the forefront is going to be that paradigm shift that we're going to see unfolding in the next few years, especially since COVID has exposed that telehealth is possible, and being a healthcare provider remotely is possible, not optimal, but still possible. That will see that huge evolution take place, especially with Amazon, buying PillPack 3 years ago. That's going to be a huge effort for pharmacists to get involved in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of the things that are driving practice that have transitioned during this pandemic are going to make us rethink that, whether it's how we do a pharmacy program or how we take care of patients as pharmacists. So my last question for you, Trey, is sort of a two-parter. What advice would you give Trey from Ole Miss, who is thinking about pharmacy as a career while you're in a pre-pharmacy? And then what advice would you give somebody who's thinking about pharmacy as a career, probably a first or second year college student as well?
When I got in school, gosh, that was almost 12 years ago, the bubble of pharmacy was big, and everybody was like, oh yeah, it's a great career, great job, pays well out of school, the return's great, there's great opportunities to live places and do things. And as a young person, that's the exciting part, is the opportunities. But I would say nowadays, it would be infinitely more important to have your why very solid before you go into it, because it's not, the PharmD isn't the ticket anymore. It's the barrier to entry. And you need to have that PharmD and that why so solid in order to make your decision post-graduation on what direction that you're going to go to acquire a postgraduate skill set. Because no matter where you go in the next 10 years, there's going to be a requirement for that. And so seeing the forest through the trees, that, you know, that hindsight 2020, you know, knowing what you need to get to where you're going is so important. And I think as a young person, you know, still now, I've just, my hindsight is still developing for where I'm at now. So, you know, that's always a saying, you know, and I think a missed opportunity was not finding an older mentor faster. Because I feel like that's a lost art now, where you're not learning from someone that is older than you, that has experience, and gaining that kind of wisdom that they didn't have when they were you, and they've gained because they are who they are now. And so I would tell my younger self to have a solid why, really take a look at what skills that I see myself needing besides a PharmD to do what I want to do, which goes back to the why, and then gaining a mentor to kind of help you see the forest through the trees, because it may seem overwhelming at first, or you may feel like that you've got everything figured out, but I promise you, you don't. Yeah, but you don't know that until you've seen the forest. And so getting those things really hammered down would be a great start for anybody wanting to go to pharmacy school. And I promise, if they do have those things hammered down, especially that why, it is infinitely rewarding on a daily basis, in more ways than one.
Trey, that's fantastic advice. I think that's incredibly well stated. And so thank you very much for taking time to be a part of this PharmChats today. I certainly have been blessed in my career to have great mentors, but I've also been blessed in my career to have great students. And I'm very proud to have been someone who was at least on the sidelines cheering you on as you were going through the program. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us for another edition of PharmChats. This has been a especially fun one for me since I got to be personally involved. It's great to be able to connect with you again. Trey, please give Lakin my best, and we'll look forward to following you all's careers for a long, long time to come.